Today we're back to look at more characters from the Indomitus box. We're going to be focusing our attentions on the Necron Overlord and the Royal Warden. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. We've been looking through the new datasheets from the Indomitus box and seeing what sort of things these new units can do for us when they're on the table. Today we're focusing on the Necron characters, the Overlord and the Royal Warden. We'll take a look at their datasheets, talk over their stats, discuss their role within the army, and whether or not they're likely going to be worth it for the points. Let's jump straight into it. We'll look at the Overlord first. So the Necron Overlord is of course an HQ choice for Codex Necron's army. He's 5 power level, rumoured to be 90 points from the leaks. This chap has the same stat line as the Overlord from the Codex before: 5-inch movement, weapon skill and ballistic skill 2+, strength and toughness 5, 5 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 10 and a 3+ save, further protected by a phase shifter that gives him a 4+ invul. As per normal, a relatively slow move, although he will be able to increase his own movement now, so he'll typically be marching around at 6 inches. Fairly durable between toughness 5 and his decent saves, but not going to be the most fighty character ever in close combat with only 3 attacks. This variant of the Overlord is armed with a Tachyon arrow and a hyperphase glaive, both of which are new options for the Overlord when compared with the 8th edition datasheets, though the Tachyon arrow was available on Amrakir the Traveller, one of their special characters. That hyperphase glaive is essentially a slightly subpar war scythe, to be honest. It's really not all that different stat-wise. It gives strength +2, so a mighty strength 7, AP -3 and damage D3, so I'd argue slightly inferior to the war scythe, which has AP -4 and a flat damage of 2. Damage D3 will be a little bit more effective against 3 wound infantry than damage 2, but will certainly be worse against things like Primaris Marines with 2 wounds compared with a war scythe. Still though, high strength, a few attacks with good AP and damage means that a Necron Overlord never really is going to be a threat that's going to be ignored in close combat. He'll typically do about 2 wounds a turn to a toughness 7 vehicle, or kill around 1 Primaris Marine. That Tachyon arrow is pretty interesting. It's basically a super powerful one-shot long-range anti-tank weapon. In the background it basically transforms a sliver of metal into the force of a thunderbolt that arcs across the battlefield and can even penetrate Titan armour. Fittingly, it's got a 120-inch range, it's an Assault 1 weapon, strength 12, AP -5 and damage D6, although of course it can only be fired once per battle. Typically I think most people are going to be wanting to do it in their first turn to try and get the maximum return on damage output as soon as possible. Even though it will be hitting on 2s and then typically wounding any toughness 7 or 8 vehicles on 3s, bear in mind that it's certainly not a guaranteed thing by any stretch of the imagination. Those two probabilities combined, it will typically have a 55% chance of causing 1 unsaved wound on a standard toughness 7 or 8 vehicle, translating to D6 damage caused. Could be a potentially decent place for a command reroll if you do happen to fail the wound roll, for example. It'll be interesting to see where they go with these Overlord weapons. I hope that they will be rolled into the standard Overlord datasheet when Codex Necrons comes out, and hopefully they'll be able to mix and match these weapons alongside the rest of them, rather than just having to take both of them together, as it would be nice to be able to customise your Overlord a little bit more carefully. Maybe say if you did want the Tachyon arrow, but didn't want the hyperphase glaive and wanted a war scythe instead, or you wanted to trade out the Tachyon arrow for a resurrection orb, for example. Until then though, it's either this set loadout or the standard Necron Overlord datasheet. Now in terms of the buffs that he provides, he's actually got quite a lot better than previously. My Will Be Done just used to be 1 ability, giving 1 unit +1 to their hit rolls and +1 to advance and charge, but that has now changed and it's been separated in 2, in my mind getting far more powerful. The actual rule My Will Be Done now only applies to the hit roll, and it applies in your command phase. The range has increased from 6 inches to 9 inches, so now you can select any one Necron Dynasty unit within the 9-inch range, and that unit will add +1 to their hit rolls, both with ranged and melee weapons, until the start of your next command phase. A very solid little buff in my opinion. Typically Necrons will be going from hitting on 3s to hitting on 2s, so a 25% damage increase overall, and it does kind of favour taking Necrons in very large units, where this has maximal effect. The second half of his ability has been split off into Relentless March, which is now an aura, so it means it'll now affect multiple units. Basically when a Dynasty unit is within 6 inches of this model, and it's selected to make a normal move or an advanced move, you add +1 to the distance it can move. So now there will be some advantage to keeping him right at the heart of your formation, maybe buffing multiple Necron Warrior or Immortal units for example. Will now be marching around a nice 6 inches, rather than the less impressive 5. That certainly will add up turn on turn, and sometimes it might make the difference between making a charge or not, if that's something that you're hoping to do. The only nerf to the rule is that it no longer applies to charge rules, it now applies to move rather than charge, but overall translating to a single unit buff that you couldn't separate from the My Will Be Done +1 to hit rolls, and going to an ability that will affect multiple units all at once, it's really quite decent. Hopefully this will get farmed out to the Overlords and Overlord equivalents within the Necron Codex, as it is a decent buff to the Necron HQ section. In terms of keywords, it appears that he's also gained the Noble tag compared with previously. I'm not sure how that will quite interact, but Royal Warden does not have this one. It might be relevant on stratagems or something, I suppose. In general, he overall just looks like a pretty efficient little HQ for leading a Necron army. A couple of decent powerful buffs for an advancing Necron gunline, although we are going to have to wait for the points cost to see how he'll weigh up against things like Catamocomb command barges, which are tougher and also have better shooting, and the other war gear options that the Overlords can take. Next we move on to the Necron Royal Warden, who looks like what I'd argue to be a bit of a secondary support HQ character. He's 4 power levels and is rumoured to be 80 points. He is again an HQ choice for Codex Necrons, which might be a little bit of a weakness seeing as they might be a bit more stretched than before, and in general he just seems to have a bit of a stat line of a very upgraded immortal character. He's got a movement of 5, weapon skill 3+, ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness 5, 4 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 10 and a 3+ save. No invul or phase shifter on this guy though, so he will be easier to kill. In terms of war gear, he's just armed with this relic Gauss blaster. It's a 24-inch range, rapid fire 2 weapon, strength 5, AP -2 and flat damage 2. Compared with a standard Gauss blaster, it's basically gained 1 additional pip of damage and double the shots. It's not too bad at long range, but it's going to be extra nasty at close range. Again, decent strength, decent AP and decent damage means it'll threaten most things, probably optimally effective against things like Primaris Intercessors, where at close range it should quite comfortably kill 1 per turn. To be honest, it's a nice little extra, but for the points cost that he has, this guy just really isn't efficient as a damage dealer compared with standard Necron troops, and if you just want Gauss blaster fire, then you're best off just taking a bunch of Immortals as before. It's a bit disappointing that he's got a reasonably proficient close combat stat line, but no actual close combat gear, so melee is certainly not going to be your friend either. Basically, you'd only take this guy in your army for one rule, and that's his adaptive strategy rule, which is basically a fall back and shoot and charge mechanic for a Necron unit within 9 inches. Again, you use this in your command phase, and you select one friendly dynasty unit within 9 inches, and until the end of that turn, that unit can fall back and still be selected to shoot and charge. I think it could potentially be very powerful, particularly if you combine it with maybe a slightly more traditional Necron gunline, where you're taking big units of warriors or immortals or something, and maybe your crafty opponent has managed to lock them up with some chaff troops or a transport vehicle charging them, potentially costing you a lot of shots. With this guy around though, they're going to be able to drop back and open fire to maximal effect. Then if it makes sense to, they could also potentially charge straight back into close combat again. Now I'm a bit on the fence about this rule, to be honest. On the one hand, it's an absolutely excellent get out of jail free rule, and it does mean against armies where it's relevant, you are going to have guaranteed firepower from at least one of the units in your core army, even if the enemy does something annoying like charging them in close combat, which they might well do if you're deploying some close range firepower units, like those warriors with a new Gauss Reaper weapon. On the other hand, 80 points is really quite a lot to include for this one ability. As we've seen, you could basically get another Overlord for that, who's got really quite strong and powerful buffing abilities, as well as a fairly decent close combat stat line. You might honestly be better just going off with a load more troops, maybe having one more unit in the core of your army might be better, as even if one of your units can't fall back and shoot, then that other unit at the back might be able to keep on shooting. It is worth noting that this could also apply to Necron vehicles as well. It never really used to be an issue with all of Necron's hover technology, but fly keyword units now can no longer fall back and shoot without some special ability like this, so it might have a little bit more use there as well. So really I'm kind of on the fence. I think sometimes he could certainly be worth it. Who is a little bit matchup dependent, he might not help you much against gunline armies that aren't coming towards you. 80 points for this one powerful rule plus the chip damage that relic Gauss blaster can do could be worth it in some matchups though. So let me know what you think of the new HQ choices down in the comments below. Do you reckon that they might be useful in a Necron army? Or do you think that they might not outcompete other options, maybe ones that deal a fair bit more damage such as that new Scorpec Lord or the Catacomb Command Barge with its increased survivability? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. We'll certainly be covering the other Necron datasheets in Indomitus and talking about Necrons as their codex emerges in 9th. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link, which you can find down in the video description below. Basically, if you were thinking about buying in some model soldiers at some point in the future, then Element Games is a good discount retailer with 10 to 20% off Warhammer products, and they ship to the UK and Europe. If you buy anything after clicking the link, then a little bit goes to Auspex Tactics, and it doesn't cost you any more whatsoever when you're actually making the order. It can just be a way to help support the channel on purchases that you might have made otherwise. I also do have a similar link for Amazon in the USA and Canada. Again, it's down in the video description below. If you click it and make an Amazon order of any sort whatsoever, whether it's Warhammer or something completely different, then again a small amount of money goes to help support the channel, and it doesn't cost you any more at time of checkout. A big thank you to you guys who have been using these. They really do help justify spending all this time making videos about model soldiers. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.